It's wild to me that if Samsung had like played things safe, they would not be here today. But they didn't. They stole, they gambled, and they failed sometimes in the most spectacular fashion. One of their phones literally caught fire, their voice assistant became a punchline, and their overall strategy of get sued now and lead the industry later, it sounds reckless, and it is, but somehow it all worked for them. Because even when Samsung gets it wrong, they don't back down, they double down on the wrong. I think that's what makes their story so fascinating. And I've seen that story unfold up close. I have reviewed every Galaxy S, every Note, every Fold, even some of the weird phones they've come out with, like the S6 Edge over the years. It looked like a spaceship and handled like a prototype. I even used the Galaxy camera at events. It was a point and shoot with a SIM card. Now, to be fair, this is not the whole story. There is a flip side of everything right with Samsung video. It's already live on the channel, I'll link it in all the places, where I gave them the credit that they deserve. So if you haven't seen that one yet, check it out after this. So right now, we're talking about the chaos. Let's get into it. So if you followed Samsung for like any length of time, if there is one face plant, face palm, whatever face where you can think of that still echoes, it's the Galaxy Note 7. And what most people remember is the recall, the fires. That they forget though, is how amazing that phone actually was. Beautiful display, it was fast, it was powerful. The S Pen finally, that was the first one to me, felt more like a gimmick. And again, for me, it wasn't just a review unit, it was like my actual phone. I took it on a family vacation that year. I remember standing like knee deep in the waves, filming with my kids, Note 7 in hand. That blue color was, I think, coral blue. It was like design perfection. It felt premium, personal, like Samsung had finally like nailed it. And the whole exploding battery thing, probably a little bit overblown. Most people had never had that issue, but that does not matter because once the media storm hit, that'll be forever how that device was remembered. The damage was done. There were recalls, airport bans, 2 full shutdowns before Samsung just killed it completely. It was not just a tech failure. Personally, as someone who used it, I felt like a betrayal. They had something so good, and then it literally self-destructed. And after that disaster, Samsung had something to prove. And the way they tried to do it, by bending the rules, like literally. The Galaxy Fold was their next big swing. And I just had a chance to see it before the world did, behind closed doors, NDAs that were like that thick, no cameras, the whole works. I held it, I folded it, and it worked awesomely. And that moment felt like a huge leap forward. And for a second, I think most people thought like, Samsung's back. But it did not take long for that magic to unravel. Review units broke, screens were being peeled, hinges failed, and just like the Note 7, it was another ambitious launch turned into a very messy recall. And another wave of like, they were that close, they almost had it. Thing is, these are not just one-off accidents for Samsung. The reason I kind of put them together in this video, they were symptoms of a bigger pattern. So while Samsung is like busy asking you to reset your password, just open your fridge, here's a product that just works. Imagine that. This video is sponsored the Ampace Andes 1500, and I think it might be the most like reliable thing in my life right now. So it's a portable power station with like actual muscle. It's got 1,462 watt hours of capacity, 2,400 watts of output, 3,600 watts surge. This thing can power like 99% of appliances. So things like laptops, even fridges, projectors, drones, even in my case, a camping air fryer that I pretend I'm going to use one day. It's IP55 rated, like whisper quiet, under 30 decibels, recharges from 0 to full in 55 minutes. But we've heard of things that can do similar things, but not to this extent. This thing actually powered an actual expedition on Mount Everest. In -4-degree temperatures, it powered drones, cameras, survival gear, all running on the Andes 1500 without skipping a beat. If it can handle and work in those extreme situations, it is good enough for me. They say like the best ability is availability, and knowing that this thing is going to be available in any weather is awesome. And it's not just another battery box with a handle. It's built to perform in places where most gear just taps out. And on Prime Day, it drops from $13.99 to $599 by my head calculator math, that is 57% off. So a huge savings. If you were considering getting one, like this is the time to do it. You are not going to find a better deal on a more reliable product. They also have other amp-pace models too in bundles that are up to 1,700 bucks off. So if you've been thinking about investing in a portable power station, even just for emergencies to have at your house, this is the one to beat. And now is the time to grab it. So hit the link down below before the sale is over. Again, if it can work on Everest, it can handle whatever it is you're gonna throw at it. Find another power station that can do that. A culture of just moving way too fast and solving problems later. And to understand the history of that, you gotta rewind to the early 2010s. So back when Samsung was clawing its way into the spotlight and at a very familiar target, it was obviously Apple. And the infamous Apple lawsuit era wasn't some fluke. Samsung's whole strategy back then was, I guess the best way to say it is, like aggressively inspired by Apple. They mirrored Apple's design, their interface, even their packaging, and they got sued hard for it. And if you weren't around then, or any of this sounds far-fetched, here's some examples of what Samsung looked like versus what Apple's devices looked like. These Samsung phones weren't just similar, they were nearly identical to iPhones in layout, icons, and again, packaging. I remember seeing these side by sides thinking like, this is clearly not a coincidence. They obviously went for it. Here's where it gets wild though. This was not some accidental overstep by like an overzealous designer somewhere in Korea. It was intentional. It was like, very intentional. Samsung, instead of investing a ton of money into R&D, made a very calculated business decision. Copy what works, ship it fast, grab market share, and inevitably when Apple sues them, just pay the fine. Ethically, super shady. From a business perspective, it might have been a little bit genius. Save the innovation dollars, beat the competition to market, then let the courts sort out the cost. They ended up paying hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, around $500 million, but it made them billions in return. That was the moment that Samsung stopped being just sort of an Android alternative and became Apple's main competitor.
There is just one more thing.
Not because they played fair, because they did not, because they played it from a business perspective really smart. And to be clear, I am not saying what they did was right. I am saying it was calculated. And I'm also saying it was very effective. Crossed ethical lines, and Samsung clearly knew it. It's a classic case of just because it worked doesn't mean it was the right move. What's wild is that mindset never really left Samsung. The idea of reacting fast, copying what works, beating the competition to the punch still shows up. Look at Dynamic Island, how Samsung mocked it, and then a few months later, Galaxy AI drops overlays doing basically the same thing. That's not a coincidence, that is legacy strategy in action. But reacting fast usually comes with like a lot of baggage. When you're trying to be first and like the flashiest, you end up building things people like didn't ask for. All right, so back in the TouchWiz days, the bloat was everywhere. I've never heard of TouchWiz. It was Samsung's old custom skin launcher for Android. It had loud colors, I think weird fonts, super laggy animation. It felt like someone had like taken stock Android and like dunked it in like candy coating brightness. It was definitely ambitious for sure, but it was also cluttered, inconsistent, and absolutely a mess. You buy a Samsung phone and you get two of everything. 2 messaging apps, 2 email apps, 2 app stores, and if you bought the Verizon version, you get even more. And on top of all of that, it didn't run well. Lag was just part of the experience. Have you ever heard sort of people say, oh, Android lag? This is where that came from. And I remember setting up new phones and spending the first hours just like uninstalling and disabling things. It felt like Samsung had built a great phone, then tried to run their entire ecosystem on top of it. I think that's what made it so frustrating. The hardware was really easy to love. It looked and it felt premium, but the software was hard to even like. And then came Bixby. Samsung didn't just add a voice assistant, they went all in. They gave Bixby its own dedicated button on the side of some phones that you couldn't remap and you couldn't turn off. Accidentally press it, and boom, Bixby launches, whether you wanted it to or not. And they did not stop there. Samsung also announced this, a smart speaker powered entirely by Bixby. It was supposed to obviously compete with Google Assistant and Alexa, except it never actually launched. It just like disappeared in an air power like poof. And even Samsung seemed to forget they announced it. And here's like the thing, when you hype something that big and then ghost it, it hurts consumer confidence. People stop believing the next like revolutionary thing is actually going to show up, and it became harder to take some of those bold claims seriously. That's the kind of overcommitment that we were dealing with. Bixby was not just a feature, it was like an imposition. And that kind of over-engineering is even harder to swallow when you're paying top dollar. And Samsung's pricing has always been premium, especially at the top end. The S25 Ultra, the foldables, you are paying laptop prices. I've been there. I've paid full price day one, only to watch the same phone, a little bit later come with earbuds, a tablet, a gift card. A few months later, it was brutal. And worse, what you got might also depend on where you bought it. Depending on region, you might get the awesome Snapdragon chip or Exynos. And for years, Exynos was like clearly the underperformer, slower, hotter, less efficient. I bought an Exynos model abroad just to test and regretted almost immediately. Same name, same specs, completely different experience. Now to Samsung's credit, the S25 series finally ditched Exynos, Snapdragon across the board. Maybe they actually listened this time, maybe they learned, but it took years of complaints and comparisons and frustrated users to even get here. Even when the specs line up, the experience still felt scattered. Samsung's ecosystem is massive, spanning phones, tablets, watches, earbuds, but it doesn't always click together. Auto switch on Galaxy Buds, sometimes swap devices mid-call. Quick share, in all fairness, is slick, unless your friend's on a Pixel. And SmartThings, well, in all fairness, really powerful, has a huge learning curve. It makes it feel more experimental and less welcoming to new users every day. Even DeX, their desktop replacement mode, is a classic Samsung ambition. It works, technically. I've tried using it for a weekend, and kind of by day two, I was back on my laptop. Not because it failed, because it never really felt like a fit. And that's kind of the pattern. Brilliant ideas, and then just hit or miss execution. And enough rough edges to remind you Samsung is clearly still figuring itself out. They want to be everything. The innovator, the luxury brand, the Android default, and sometimes a copycat. And that confusion, I think it shows. But it also is what makes them fascinating. Because yeah, Samsung gets it wrong, and they get it wrong loudly, publicly, and often, but they do always come back. They improve, they evolve, and sometimes they set the pace for everyone else. Samsung is very clearly not perfect, not even close. But maybe that's what makes them so compelling, because they don't just stumble, they tend to like stumble forward, loudly, publicly, and they do it while trying to move the whole industry with them. Every phone release is a swing. Sometimes a safer swing, sometimes brilliant, sometimes baffling. And even when they mess it up, I keep watching, because somewhere underneath all that chaos, there's huge potential, and there's huge ambition. And sometimes there's real progress. I think that's what makes Samsung worth talking about. And I say all this not to tear them down at all, because I've seen what Samsung is capable of when they get it right. And I want more of that. I think that we all do. So yeah, everything wrong with Samsung, it is a long list that I had to cut down to make this video, but it's also what makes them Samsung. And I'm sure you've got a few Samsung horror stories. Let us know in the comments, especially if you survived the Note 7 saga. Also, appreciate a like if you ever, I don't know, rage disabled Bixby. We'll have a bunch more coming up with flip-flopping. Apple is next up on the horizon. Google coming shortly after. I love making these sort of flip side of the coin videos, but if you got a topic you want me to cover, just let me know.